for the Stockholm meetup. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about RedwoodJS. Redwood is a new full stack project web framework that I've been working on. And we have a core team of 4 people. I think a few of them have joined today, so they might be answering questions you have in chat. Feel free to chat. I have my chat open on my left here. So if you say things in chat, I'll try to look over every once in a while and see if there's anything that needs answering. David Price is here, I see in chat. He's on the core team, so he'll be able to answer any questions you have while I'm talking as well. So I wanted to start by giving you just a quick overview of Redwood and myself. So I'm going to share my screen here real quick, give you a little bit of a presentation, and then I'll get into some live coding, which I know is everybody's favorite thing. So here we go. So RedwoodJS, this is going to be a quick intro and a little bit of live coding. I'm Tom Preston-Werner. You can find me online at Mojambo on Twitter and GitHub and basically everywhere else on the internet. If you want to follow what I'm doing, give me a follow on Twitter. That'd be awesome. I co-founded GitHub and worked there for many years. You may be familiar with that website. Now I am working on another startup called Chatterbug, which is if you want to learn a foreign language, if you want to learn German or French, or if you want to improve your English, we will soon, all you Swedes are already perfect at English, so you got that covered. But we're trying to do it in a different way that's better than what people are doing, bringing design and technology at its best to language learning. That's what I'm working on now. And you may also be familiar with some of my open source and other projects that I helped create. So Jekyll, semantic versioning, Toml, the best configuration language, Gravatar, one of my earliest inventions, now run by automatic gravatars, avatars that follow you around the internet. These are some of the things I've done in the past, but now it's time for Redwood. And so what is Redwood? Well, we say that Redwood is bringing full stack to the Jamstack. So if you're familiar with what the Jamstack is, that's kind of a new way. That's the old way, but everything old is new again. It's the new way to bring static websites to the internet and then add on functionality with JavaScript calling out to APIs. It's very fast because you can put them on CDN. It's very secure because you're not running database-backed services usually. Well, with Redwood, you will be. We'll talk about that. But Redwood is really using the Jamstack mentality and the development methodology to build full stack web applications. And we think it's pretty cool. So I'm going to show you exactly what that means. So here we go. I'm going to start with an application here. And what I'm going to do is, the first thing I'm going to do is kind of run you through an existing Redwood application and give you a little bit of a tour. And along the way, I'll explain the architecture of Redwood and a few things about it. So here's the RedwoodJS website, redwoodjs.com. If you go there right now, the best way to get to know Redwood is to go through the tutorial. It'll start from scratch. You'll create a brand new Redwood project. You'll add pages to it. You'll add routes to it. You'll set up the database. You'll even deploy it, amplify, all the way through. This is by far the best way to do it. And if you like watching videos, one of our core team members, Rob Cameron, has created some really amazing video tutorials that you can watch and go through them. But we have a full set of tutorial walkthroughs here. But for this talk, I'm going to go through this repository, which is example to do. You can find it on the RedwoodJS project on GitHub. And this is an example of a simple to-do application. Everybody knows what those are like, so it's easy to understand and easy to figure out where things are in the code base. So over here on my computer, I've already cloned it down. I renamed mine to my to-do because I work on the actual example to-do one, so I just called it my to-do. I have that open. I've run yarn on it. I've actually upgraded it to the latest version, which I haven't done yet. So I'm just going to say that I upgraded it to 0.7.0. We're about to release an 0.7 version, and this is rc.2, just so that you can see the files in the left that are changing as we go along. Okay. I'll get that checked into the actual repository at some point soon. So here we go. So we have this repository fully cloned down. And I want to give you a quick overview of how it lays out on disk. Oh, but first I'm going to spin it up so you can see what it looks like as an actual website. So to do that, I've already run yarn to get it installed, to get everything installed, so you don't have to watch me do that. The next thing I'm going to do, and then I also ran this command here. I did yarn redwood db up, so I have a database running already. And then I'm going to run this last command, yarn redwood, and you can always just type RW for short, yarn redwood dev, and that's going to spin up the two sides of it. And the architecture of a Redwood application is that you have a React application that is your client, and then you have a GraphQL API that is on your server side. And right now, this is optimized to run those in AWS Lambda or other functions as a service places. So those are your two sides. We call them the web side and the API side. So when I run yarn redwood dev, it's going to spin up locally both of those sides and have them running. So if that succeeds, then I can go to localhost 8910, and I will have my application here running. I've already entered all the things in here, but you can see that I can check them off. I can add more things in here. Like I also need, what do I need? Tacos and beer. So, you know, it's just a very simple to-do application. You get it, right? So let's see how that works in the code. So I'll start you on the back end, on the GraphQL API, so you can see where this data is coming from. So on disk here, we have these two sides, API and web. Each of these represent a full project, and each have their own package.json file, and these are organized inside one single Git repository as a mono repo. And then we use yarn workspaces to operate on both of them. That way, when you deploy this thing to somewhere like Netlify, you just push the Git repository, and then Netlify knows how to put the client side on CDN, and it knows how to deploy the GraphQL API to AWS Lambda. And it just keeps everything together. We don't have to worry about two different versions of things. It's all in the same code base, even though it's really two separate projects. So on the API side, if we look in source here, we'll find the goods. And the most interesting bit is where you start, and that's with the GraphQL SDL file. So here we have the schema that we're defining for the GraphQL. And if you're familiar with GraphQL, this will look familiar to you. If you're not, then when you go and learn GraphQL, you're going to be learning what these mean. It's really pretty intuitive. Create types for the different objects that we have. In our case, we have a to-do object. It has an ID, a body, and a status with these types. We can do certain queries, like we can ask for all of the to-dos, and those will come back as an array of to-do objects. And we have certain things that we can do to change the database called mutations. We have a create to-do, an update to-do status, and a rename to-do, and they take certain parameters, and then we'll all return whatever we want back out of those to-do objects that we've changed. So in Redwood, we just write the SDL file directly, and then we're going to implement it. So the implementation for this GraphQL API, we do some nice things for you by automatically mapping the implementation to this implementation file. And we put those in what are called services files. And a service to us means a chunk of your backend that you're carving out to represent a certain service. So for us in a to-do app, there's really only one service. It's a to-do service. In a more complex application, let's say you're writing some forum software. You might have a content service that represents posts that people make, any comments that they make on them. You might bundle all of that together in one service that has one GraphQL SDL file that represents that part of your backend. And then you'll have other services, maybe a payments service. You might have all kinds of different services in there eventually, and you can just split them out. And this helps you organizationally just keep track of where everything is. And so the implementation is going to be right here. And you can see how little code that is. Normally, we're using Apollo server here. Normally, you'd be writing a resolver map, and you'd put all of your implementation into that resolver map as a set of functions. But we found that what that makes difficult to do is reuse the code in those resolvers from other places in your backend, in your business logic. And so we thought, wouldn't it be nice if you could extract those out in such a way that made these functions reusable in other services? And so by putting the implementation in a services file and automatically mapping them to the SDL file, to the GraphQL SDL, you can now reuse these functions anywhere you want in your backend, right? If you want a list of to-dos, all you do is import to-dos from this file, from services to-dos.js, and you will have this function available to you, and it's just going to run this database call. And we use Prisma in the backend here, Prisma 2, to do these actual calls. So these are async calls. The Apollo will handle async return just fine. It knows how to deal with that. So here we can just return them as async. Elsewhere in your code base, you might want to await them or just handle them asynchronously, however you like. But this is the implementation. This is all it takes to implement to-dos call into GraphQL. Similarly, you'll remember there was create to-do, update to-do status, rename to-do. Those are all the same names: to-dos, create to-do, update to-do, and this is how we map them. And every GraphQL query and mutation and type has to have a separate name anyway, so we can be unambiguous in that mapping. Let me pause for a second and see if there are any quick questions. I don't see anything in the chat. Feel free to chat if you like. It doesn't bother me. I will look at it a little bit. Okay. So I'll keep going here. It's weird just talking into the void. Is everything, like, you can all hear me and everything's fine? Just give me a sign. Loud and clear. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, just making sure I'm not talking into the void where no one can hear me. Okay, perfect. All right, thank you. I feel much better now. Okay, so let's go. Okay, so this is the implementation. All right, we've done some fancy things for you to make sure that mapping works, to make sure you can use these from elsewhere. You might be wondering, how do you deal with things like context? Like, I want my context. I need to know certain things about the request or the info object, or when I need to define something on a specific field. You can do all of those things, and they all happen in this implementation file, and we map them for you automatically. And you have things like context available to you just as a global, it turns out. So you can do context. You can just write context.whatever, and it'll give you the things that you can see in context. And I'll show you that when we do a little bit of authentication, if we have time for it. I'll try to go fast here. Okay, the website is going to do hot module reloading for you. So every time you save a file, it's going to pick that up, and you don't have to do any restarts or refreshing of anything on your website. So here's how it works. And we include a GraphQL inspector. So if you go to localhost 8911, it'll show you your GraphQL function. Another little note here is that the GraphQL function is the one that we use to expose your GraphQL API, but you can also write other functions if you want, and they will just be deployed as normal AWS LAMP functions or whatever service you're using. And so you can just add them in here, and you write your handler in the normal way and go about your business. Right now, we just have the GraphQL one that's going to be used automatically by the front end. So if we click in here, we get the inspector. And you can see that you can run any query you want in here. So here's just the to-dos query that we're going to run, this one right here. And I'm going to run that. And you'll see that we get all of the information back in a normal GraphQL way. So all this works. And this is all the code that it took to make all of that happen. It was just this little bit of implementation right here, right? That's all of our code for a to-do application on the back end. Okay, great. So we've got GraphQL, a whole GraphQL API, done, a couple of lines of code. Booyah, amazing, awesome. Okay, great, that's the back end. So now how do we consume that on the front end? Let's look and see how we do it. So here's the web side. And the reason that we call them sides is because we think eventually we can have more sides than just a web and API side. Redwood was created from the beginning with the idea that you might want additional clients later on. Like, eventually you very well may want a mobile client, or you may want a command line client, or maybe your software is going to run at the mall in a kiosk, and so you want a kiosk client. Or you strike a deal with Tesla and you need a Tesla application. Well, now you have a Tesla client, right? Eventually, you're going to need a whole set of clients. And when you write with Redwood, you're creating a GraphQL API from the beginning that you're going to be able to consume in any kind of front end that you want very easily. And that's why this architecture makes a lot of sense. Okay, so right now we just have the web. That's what we're concentrating on. We are also experimenting with a React Native front end side client as well. So if you're interested in that, come over to the community and say you're interested, and there's some people already working on that, and you can help out. Okay, so the website. We've got the source directory here, and the most interesting thing is the routes file to start with. And so the routes file is going to just show you what all your routes are. Now, we've written our own router because there were some things that we wanted to do that the existing React routers couldn't do, but it will, in general, look fairly familiar to you if you've used any of the React routers before. So in our case here, we are going to specify routes. So we're going to say, all right, the path is /, so that's going to be my homepage route, and it's going to map to a homepage object, and I'm going to give it this name. And you'll see why you have this name available to you later on. Actually, you won't, not in this code base. But the idea here, by giving names, we can actually do in our pages, we can link to other pages by name instead of having to create a string. Maybe I'll show you that if we have some time. But you can look in the tutorial for how all that works, the named route functions. And then we have a not found page. So if there's a page that's not found, like I go to, foo, then it's just going to run this not found page. And that's defined here. And there's always just one of those not found pages, and that's in pages. And so if we go back to the home page, then let's take a look at it. So here's homepage that lives in the source pages directory, homepage, here's homepage, and homepage is just a normal React component that represents a page. And I'm using in this code base styled components. We organize them in this kind of way to make them really easy to include and also extract. You can use out into a separate file and just import that SC constant, and then you wouldn't have to change anything else, which is why they look like this. And so in here we have a wrapper that's just going to center things, and we have a title, to-do list, and we have this to-do list cell and this add to-do. So the to-do list cell is going to represent the list of to-do items. And cells are something that we've created for Redwood that make it easy to do your data fetching. And they make it possible in a declarative kind of a way. So I will show you what that means. So this is to-do list cell. We can see that that lives in source components to-do list cell. So source components to-do list cell. And in here, we have the implementation. So to-do list cell. So this is what cells look like. Now, cells don't look like normal components. They're actually going to just be exporting a set of constants that represent the different parts life cycle of your data fetching component. So here we have a query that we're going to run, and this is the same query that I ran in the GraphQL inspector. So to-dos, it gets back the ID, body, and status, and we're going to export that as query, uppercase. And then we're going to export a loading state and a success state. And indeed, you can actually export a failure state and an empty state. If you're returning a list of things, you can have a state that will be shown when you return an empty array, for instance. And so this is how you define a cell. It's declarative. You're just saying, these circumstances, these are what my components should look like. And then we do the orchestration for you, depending on what that GraphQL call is going to return. So in this case, we're doing a call called to-dos. And so in a successful return from this data fetch, it's going to pass you the same named thing into the success component. So you didn't have to do any of the wiring of that up. You just know that on success, I'm going to get back a prop that looks like to-dos inside an object. You can take that to-dos and you can iterate over it and output a to-do item for each of those things. And a to-do item is just a normal React component that's just going to take those props, ID, body, status, and it's going to show the right stuff. Okay. And in loading, it'll show the state, right? So while it's doing the data fetch, this is what it'll show. This one is not very fancy, but you could, create a sort of a nice skeleton. and that would be here, and it's kept separate. You don't have to do a lot of the if, all the conditional logic like you normally would. It's just very declarative. We handle it for you. And the power of this is that later on, as we keep improving the framework, we can do fancier things around data fetching that allow us to, in the data fetching path, and maybe aggregate GraphQL queries, solve things like the waterfall problem where you have a query that has to complete before a child query can start to run. When we have access to that intermediary, the thing that actually runs the cell, we can get in there and do some nice things for you, as well as at build time. There's a lot that we can do. So we'll be doing that. I should mention Redwood is still in alpha. It's 06 right now. It's going to be 07 in the next couple of days because we just are launching authentication. So still early, very, like super early. So everything I show you is just it's very early days. So keep that in mind. But it means that if you want to participate, if you want to help out, like you have a big chance now to really alter the course of how Redwood comes about. If you're interested in getting involved, now is a great time to do it. There's other fancy stuff in here. This is around manipulating the Apollo cache, just to do things really efficiently. This is the mutation. This is how you would run a mutation, and this is how you kick off the mutation. We use Apollo's use mutation. It makes it really easy to do. This shows off how to do optimistic responses, which is a little bit more complex, and maybe there's some things we can do to make this a little less complicated and manual. But right now, this is the standard way that you do optimistic responses in Apollo. That's why this file is a little more intensive than some other ones would be. Okay, so those are the elements on this page, and then there's also that add to do element, which is here, and that also is going to do this this mutation. So you'll see it's also called use mutation, and this is how you do that. And this is an example of updating Apollo's cache. And again, that's kind of a manual process. Probably we can make that experience better than it is today. Okay, so that's the website. It's really all it comes down to: routes file, pages file, components. You have access to the index HTML it's right there in the app. So anything that you want to put in there. If you want to add CSS files that are global, you can do that in here. Just a couple of global CSS styles. Index.js is where you initialize your React thing and bind it and mount it to the HTML. And there's a couple of things here. There's a fatal boundary that will catch any errors that happen in your coding so that you can see them instead of just getting a blank page. And then you can see and trace exactly Redwood provider context things to the application, and then it's straight into the routes file. So it's very easy to follow. It's fairly simple to set up. So what I want to do now is show you how you would add some functionality. So what I'm going to do is, let's say we want to add a page, and we want to create a page that's going to show you a count of how many to-do items you have. So let's see how quickly we can do that. So let's start on the API side, and we're going to say, I need a new query, okay? And my query I'm going to call to-dos count, and that's going to return an integer, okay? That's the SDL file, done. And in the services file, I'm going to implement that as, I'm going to just export a const, okay? It's a function, to-dos count. I'm going to call it the same thing. That's how the automatic mapping works. It's a function. It's going to call, using Prisma, it's going to call db to do count. Okay. Ta-da! That's it. That's the whole thing. That's the whole GraphQL API. So let's make sure that actually works. To-dos count. Booyah! 5 to-dos. All right, there we go. Look, that was it. It was like 2 lines of code. Now I have my new GraphQL endpoint. And that's what we do with Redwood. Like everything that we're striving for is to give you that ease of construction, okay? And even the things that are hard today, we will endeavor to make easier, to make everything as easy as that just was when it comes to both the back end and the front end. So awesome, we've got to-dos count. All right, miraculous, amazing. So let's get rid of that. And now on to the front end. It's a little bit more involved. Let's open our routes file. And down here, I'm going to use a Redwood generator to create a page. So I'm going to say yarn Redwood generate, or just G for short. Save myself some keystrokes. Yarn Redwood generate page, and I'm going to call it count. I'm just going to call it the count page. So watch up here in the routes file, we now have a new route called /count, and it's going to go to a count page, and it has this name count in case we need that later on. So here's the page that it created for us, count page. And now I should expect that if I go to my browser, I can go to my count page, and indeed there it is. Okay, so now we have a page all set up and the route created, and this is all it does so far. But what do we want it to do? Well, we need to get some data from the database, that count value. And so we're going to need a cell. We're going to do data fetching, so we need a cell. So let's generate a cell. And now we're just going to do yarn Redwood generate cell. And this one's going to be called count to-dos. I'm just going to call it that exact same thing. So let's see what that creates for us. It's creating count to-dos cell, and it handles all the capitalization. You just kind of put it in here. As long as Redwood knows where the word boundaries are, you could put underscores, you could put, upper and lower case, snake case here, whatever you want to do. We'll figure it out and we'll capitalize it properly for you. So less thinking you have to do. Okay, great. So count to-dos cell. Let's go in there. And in here we can see a cell, right? So we have the query, and this one's a lot simpler so to understand than the other one. So we have a loading state that we just default to something, an empty state. This will never be empty because it's just an integer return. Whatever, we could delete that if we wanted to, don't need it. A failure state, in case there's an error, it'll just print out the error message. And then a success state that by default is just going to JSON stringify whatever comes back, and it'll print that out. So we'll just leave that as is for the moment. Now we're also up here making a guess as to what your query might look like. In this case, it's just an integer response. It's sort of expecting an object to come back, whatever. We'll improve this over time as well, maybe by automatically looking at your GraphQL schema and seeing if we can figure out exactly what it is you want. In this case, it's a little bit wrong, but there we go. Now it's right. All we want is count to do. So that should be the correct query. And when that succeeds, we have the same thing, named the same thing down here. As long as these two match, then we're good to go. And it's just going to print that out. Okay, so now we have a cell. So let's go back to our count page. And whoops. Now we're going to just import that. Import to-dos. Oh, crap, I named it wrong. Should have been to-dos count. I blew it. That's okay. Hold on. Delete. This is the beauty of generators. To-dos count. I totally just did that on purpose. I'm kidding. I didn't do it on purpose. But you can see just, this is why generators are nice. We just do this. Done. Now we're back to where we were. Ta-da. Okay, to-dos count. So that matches the GraphQL query, print it out. So now in our count page, import to-do count, to-dos count cell from source components to-dos count cell. So that should be the right path. And then we're just going to call that cell instead of this line of code. So open that, and that's the whole thing there. And oh, snap. There we go, 5. Can you see that? I don't know if you can see that. 5. So here we go. Now we have, well, we're done. That's our whole page. We did it. So end to end with a GraphQL API and data fetching and the various states of data fetching. And to prove that that's actually doing what I say it's doing, we can come in here and we can look at the GraphQL call that's being made, and we can look at what the query is. Here it's just running to-dos count, and the response that comes back is the data to-dos count 5, and we're just routing all of that to the right places for you. And that's the whole thing. We could set this to slow 3G, and we can see if we can get the loading state in here. No, it's really slow. Loading. This is, man, how did we live in 3G? 3G is the worst. Fast 3G. There we go. Okay. So there you see the loading state, and you can make that loading state be whatever you want, right? So if I wanted, for instance, to say that it was, I don't know, X instead, or it just returns a stringified thing. So maybe it's just like X. Then we could do that, and I can reload this page, and now we get X instead of 5, right? So this is how you can make your loading state work for you. That's what will be returned while it's loading. Okay, so that now is how we do end-to-end stuff. So that's sort of the first part of my demo. We're at about the half-hour mark now. I can also show you authentication, which is super interesting. But I'd love to answer any questions that you have first. So let me just run through here right now and see if there's any questions that I can answer. Looks like David's been answering questions in chat, so that's great. Okay, well, you all like live demos, and I haven't screwed up all that much yet, so that means I haven't live demoed quite enough. So let's move on to the auth. I'll see if I can do that quickly, and then I'll do some Q&A. So I'm just going to commit this real quick. And move on and show you some authentication stuff. So in the latest version, we have an 070 RC release candidate out now that I'm using, RC2. And I'm going to run a generator to add authentication. So like a lot of things, we have a generator for that. So I'm going to run yarn redwood generate auth. And we support out of the box right now Netlify and Auth0. We will be adding like magic links and Google and your own, like store everything in your own database. We'll be adding sort of plugins for all of these different authentication providers that will all be as easy to install as this. So yarn redwood generate auth Netlify. Let's give that a second to run. It's going to pull down some packages. It's going to modify a few files to install the authentication machinery. And then we should be ready to go with a new application. And so when I say authentication, this is going to be end-to-end. So this is front-end and back-end. Everything that you need in order to authenticate a user and then make sure that that user can be authenticated on the back-end as well. So it's reloaded our application that is now authentication enabled. Let's look at exactly what it added. So in the functions GraphQL, it has imported this get current user function from source lib auth.js, which is a new file that it's going to add that will allow you to modify what your current user looks like. It's adding that to the context. These are package specifications. In the index, it's importing, this is on the web side, web source index.js. It's importing some new things, the auth provider from Redwood, the identity widget itself. We're initializing it. We're adding the auth provider here and specifying what it needs to pull in. And then it's just package stuff. So that's it. So that's really all it takes to get authentication initialized in your application. And so now we should be able to use it. And we installed it and the app restarted. So we should be all set to use it. We'll see if that's true. So what do we want to do? Well, the first thing that we're going to need is somewhere to send people when they're not authenticated. So let's open source routes and let's generate a new page. And we're going to call it login. So I'm going to say yarn redwood generate page login. And that's going to give me this login page. Cool. And if I go to login, then I should get that page, hopefully. Okay, it's reloading there. So we have this new login page, and that's great. But what we want to do is send people there if they're not authenticated. So right now, if I go to the home page, what I want to do is make this whole site private, essentially. So it's like you can only go here if you have an authenticated user. So to do that, we have in Redwood the private component, and private is going to take an unauthorized prop, and that's going to be the name of the page that we want it to go to if your user is not authenticated. Okay. And then we're going to wrap the pages that we want to be authenticated like so. And then we just import private from our router. And the app is restarting. Oh, I broke it. Success. Live demo. What do we got? Doesn't like that one. Why does it not like that one? Hold on. Router, route, path, private. Oh, there we go. All right. Just an issue with the restart, I guess. We'll see if we can figure out what that bug was. Okay, so we should now. I wanted this to, hold on. Maybe I do need to restart the actual server here. Let's see if that's going. Command failed. Live debugging, my fave. Oh, you know what? You'll never believe this. On my machine, for some reason, when I do a yarn install, it kills part of this ES abstract directory for some reason. Oh my God, it's the worst. We were trying to debug this. So check this out. If I go to node modules, ES abstract, this is a module. There's supposed to be like a bunch of stuff in here, but it only installs like half of the library. So I've done this like a million times. So I'm just going to delete everything in this module, and then I'm going to copy it from example blog where I know that this module is installed correctly. Oops. And I'm going to just copy everything from there into here. And look, this is everything that's supposed to be in there. Where did it go? Well, where did it go? I don't understand. Anyway, it works on everyone else's machines. It doesn't work on mine. Okay, sorry about that. So now if we go back here and we restart this, turns out that it's really hard to get something running when you don't have all of the necessary code to make it run. So I'll give this a reload and see what happens. Okay. Now this should be redirecting. Is it unauthenticated? This is where better TypeScript. So we're working on full end-to-end TypeScript support for this, which would save my. No. Is it not? Hold on. David, do you know if is it unauthenticated or unauthorized? This is the problem with. It should be probably unauthenticated. So we're not doing authorization. We're doing authentication. It is unauthorized. Unauthorized. And I think it would complain if I had it wrong. Let's debug. This is in the private route here. Alpha software. What are you going to do? Unauthorized is login. Oh, maybe I am authenticated. So I've been playing with this. I've been playing around with this. So it's possible that I am authenticated, David says. That's entirely possible. Let's find out. Okay. So let's go and implement the login page. Okay. Pages, login page. Here's my login page. So let's go there directly. Right now it's nothing. So in order to use the authentication machinery, all I'm going to do is I'm going to import use auth from RedwoodJS auth. And then in my login page component here, I'm going to pull out a couple of things. I'm going to pull out authenticated, which is a Boolean as to whether I am authenticated. And I'm going to pull out current user. and I'm going to pull out a login function and a logout function. And those are going to be from the useAuth hook. And then I'm going to create a couple of buttons. Button. And on click, I'm going to say on click, this one's going to be login. And I'm going to say login. And I'm going to have a button on click equals log out. Log out. So I'm going to create my two buttons to execute those functions to log me in and log me out. And then I'm going to say, I want to know when I'm logged in, if I am logged in. So I'm going to say authenticated and then I'll give myself a thing here, and I'm going to say current user, and we'll see if there's anything in there. Oh God. Oh, it doesn't like that. We did this yesterday. There's a note about money. Doesn't like this. Not a valid React child. Function of children. I swear I did this yesterday. Well, we'll try that in a second. Let's see if I can log out and see if it'll then kick me. There we go. Okay, so I think I was logged out. So this is hooked up to Netlify now. So you'll see that with the addition of just that little function right there, now I click the login button and I get the Netlify login page. So indeed, I think that I was playing with this yesterday and I think I left myself logged in. That was dumb. I have a user already set up on Netlify that this is already linked to. And the way that this works in development for Netlify is you set the URL of your Netlify project, and that's how it knows how to connect it in development mode to your Netlify identity account where you've got all your sort of authentication stuff in there. I could clear that out and put in a new one if I wanted to, but I'm not going to because I already set that up. And now when I log in, then it'll say I'm logged in. And now I can go to this page and it will show me what's on that page, right? So now I have on my web side an authenticated user with just a couple of lines of code, really, and a few screw ups along the way. But what are you going to do? Live coding. But that's it. That's on the front end. Now you got that user, and you get access to current user, which has some stuff in it. And now I'm curious what I really want to print out. I really want to print this out. I would do this the old-fashioned. If authenticated, then maybe we'll do it this way. Current user. Oh, it really doesn't like that. I'll have bad at React. Ha, okay. It really doesn't like that. Let's do it this way. Indicated, and maybe I could just get it to print out what's in there. Man, I'm just breaking this everywhere. But indeed, in current user, I swear there is information in there on your current user. So we could try console logging it right now. So here's what's in there. So we've got some user metadata. We've got the email. Here's my email address. We've got user metadata that has my name in it. So this is stuff that's in the current user. And so you can see that we would be able to use that if my brain was useful. But I want to very quickly, so it's already, we're getting close to the end of the time slot here. But so this is a work in progress still. We will improve this, but you can see some of the things. You can also use all of this inside any component if you have a layout and you want to test whether you have a current user or not, and then display certain things on the page, then you can do that. So you can do this at the route layer. You can do a check authentication at the route layer. You can do it at the component layer in the layout. You can do it at the component layer in a component. So you have fine-grained access to authentication all the way down. And then we will be working on rule-based authorization soon as well, where you can specify roles for the users, and that'll be all integrated into the machinery as well. Now on the API side, you can see even though I need to be authenticated on the front end to do these things, on the back end, it's still wide open. I can still run whatever queries I want on the back end. And so we need to secure our API side as well. And we're still working on exactly what that's going to look like. Maybe we can do some annotations on the SDL. We're still figuring out how to make that really easy, sort of like corollary to the routes themselves. But the way that you would do this right now in a services file is by looking in context, and we give that to you automatically. So this is the to-dos query right here. And so I'm gonna put authentication on my to-dos query. So I'm gonna get this thing like so, and in each of these now, like this, like I would have to do this in every single function, which I don't really want to do. I'd rather do it at a higher level. So that's what we're sort of designing right now. But I'll show you how to do this at a fine-grained level. You can just say if current user on the context object, context. So context is just available to you. It's what comes in from GraphQL. If not current user, so if I don't have a current user that's set up, then I'm just going to return an empty array, say, for now. There's a lot of different ways that we could decide to return. We could return an authentication error, which is probably the better thing to do. But right now, for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to have it return an empty array instead. And so because my GraphQL inspector here does not have authentication built in, and that's another thing that we'll do, is make it possible to like authenticate this inspector so that you can still get in and do live checking of things. We don't have that integrated yet, but you can see that you just have context is just available, which is what allows you to write your services files as just normal functions. We sort of extracted those out of the signatures of the functions and just made them available. And when you install Redwood Authentication, ta-da, current user is just available to you, right? And there you go. So that's really about it that I want to say on authentication on the API side. So I think that's probably enough to wrap up a quick intro to RedwoodJS. I'll just say quickly that really this whole project is about wanting to find a way to create a full stack application and deploy it to a thing that just takes care of it for us. And we're only just a few steps along that path, but Netlify, places like Netlify, Vercel is doing some great work in this regard, AWS itself, and others are now doing great work to have this sort of universal deployment machine, as I sort of refer to the concept, where I have a code base, I push it there, it deploys it, it's on CDN, it's on Lambda, spin up a database for me. Right now you have to like spin up your own database, and we'll try to make all of those things easier. But with this architecture, you can have your entire application distributed around the world, right? So we call that being edge ready, which means that if your front-end client that's being delivered is on CDN around the world, you could potentially also have your database have read replicas all around the world, or some databases even have really sophisticated capabilities to do writes around the world. But if you have a database that is capable of that, now you want to run your business logic also closer to the edge, which you could do with Lambda. So you could put your CDN, client delivery, your business logic, and your database, and have all of those elements pushed all the way to the edge. And that's what this architecture allows you to do. So Redwood is sort of contemplating as a future way that we might want to build and deploy applications. And that's the target that we have, right? That's what we're building for. So some of the things you see us do today might not make 100% sense if you're targeting deployment today. And it's because we're really developing for a year from now or 2 years from now, so that we're ready, so that we're there. The technology is polished and really useful by the time that these technologies all come together, and providers like Netlify finally have all of these things hooked up in a way that allows this the level of orchestration that I believe is possible and that I really want to use myself. And that's what Redwood is about. It's about that. It's about developer experience. It's about building a great, welcoming community. And it's just about bringing joy to the modern JavaScript developer's life, and TypeScript, working on full end-to-end TypeScript support as well. So you'd be able to do all this in TypeScript if that's your preference. And that's Redwood. Ta-da! So now I have some time for questions. Guess we only have a bit, but we could probably run over the hour if we needed to. So I don't know how we want to do questions. Maybe people can just ask questions in chat, and I'll look and answer anything, or we can have. You're all doing such a good job of, when is 07 coming? Oh yeah, we'll ship 07 very soon. David said so. 07 is imminent, and it will have the integrated authentication, and we'll keep working on it. As I said, like there's still a lot to figure out here. There's also one thing I didn't show you that's kind of cool is on the API side, the authentication generator added file, which is in source lib auth.js. And this is a way for you to get that current user object that I accessed in here, this object. This object you can generate here. You can modify it. So right now we use JOTs to mediate this authentication. And right now it's just passing that JOT through unmodified. But if you wanted to change something about that file, then you could do that. So let me do this. Console log context current user. And we'll run. I have to do it from the front end actually. Am I logged in? So here we go. So here's the contents of that current user. So you know I'm not faking it. It's got my email, it's got my full name in here that I can get. So this object is not, it's like, okay, well, thanks. That's the exact contents of the JOT, and that's cool. But I'd rather pull some information from the database that I have stored, maybe, or just modify this so I can get this full name up at the top and call it name. And that's what this file is for. So instead of returning the JOT directly, and you'll hear me saying JOT, and a lot of there just seems like a lot of confusion about this, but apparently the correct pronunciation of that word, of that abbreviation, is JOT. So I'm saying it. Also, did you know? I mean, a lot of people call them PNG files, but in the specification, it says that they're pronounced ping. They're called ping files, and that one's there's no argument about that. That's just how it is. It's in the specification, and also it's GIF. It's pronounced GIF. Get on board, people. Okay, so instead, I'm going to return name is going to be JOT. I know, I feel weird saying it too. JOT dot full user metadata dot full name. So if that's what I wanted to do, and let's say that's not useful. That's not very useful by itself, right? But I can get it to be whatever I want. So I probably want the ID in there. Maybe I call it ID, but it's really the JOT sub. And maybe I want the email in there. So I'm just going to pass that through, email. So I can make modifications to that however I like. I could even pull from the database in here and get additional information. Like that's how you would do it if you're implementing your own authentication. Then you would pull from the database and inject stuff into there. So I just wanted to show that off real quick. Okay. Any other questions? I could talk about the roadmap. So roadmap-wise, we have a lot of things we want to work on. So authentication is top of mind for us. We also want to work on Jest test integration, which we're making really good progress on right now. So testing will be fully integrated. It's not really right now, but you'll see that when we generate these pages for you, we also generate kind of skeleton test files that live alongside the components, and you'll be expected to be able to test all your things there. And then we'll have integration tests that do more end-to-end testing, probably that will live on each side and be run. So we're figuring that all out now. We'll also be integrating Storybook, which will be amazing. So you'll be able to do your component design and modeling in Storybook in isolation, which is amazing, which is the best. Like to be able to do your component design and implementation in Storybook without having to worry about the entire rest of your application and what state it's in. You can just twiddle things in Storybook, pass it around to other developers. It's amazing. So we're integrating Storybook right now as well. Those are kind of the big ones. Jest, Storybook, continuing work on authentication and authorization. Authentication being, are you who you say you are? And authorization being, depending on what roles you have, do you have access to specific things and calls that you can make? Any other questions? I don't know if there's a way for people to ask me questions live. I still feel like I'm just speaking into the void.
Well, if anyone wants to ask a question, just unmute yourself and ask, and we'll see if.
Well, there we go. We have the technology.
Mayhem. But obviously, this is, I guess so. It's fairly inspired by Rails. It feels quite Railsy with the generators and everything, and I'm sort of loving that. It seems like a huge improvement to the cowboy world that exists out there in JavaScript land, I feel like sometimes.
Yeah, it's definitely Rails inspired. A lot of these ideas, I mean, I was a Rails developer. I haven't written a lot of Rails recently, but what Rails brought to the table when it first came about was revolutionary. Like, I love Rails. I have my problems with Rails. I have my problems with basically every technology. And Redwood is sort of just an experiment, really, to see if we can do some of these things in a better way that fits with modern technologies. React, the one-way data flow of React is just so, it changes everything about modern web development. But it's, React by itself is just React. It's never just React, it's React and friends. And the problem with that is now everyone has to choose what all the friends are. And so every stack looks different, right? So you go from one company to another company, or every project you do, you're like choosing like a complete new set of technologies because things are changing so fast over time. And it feels like there's an opportunity for some standardization to come in and really help people go faster by making some of those choices for them and integrating things really well, right? Because that's all work you have to do. You're like, hey, I want some of these nice things like doing this automatic mapping between the SDL file and the implementation. Like that's cool, but it comes at a cost. And the cost is that you have to tell all your other things that you've implemented what you did, especially when you do things at build time. So on the website, for instance, testing has been really challenging to get running because we do certain fancy things. Like if you look at this routes file, you'll see that I never import page. I never import count page or home page or not found page. And that's because at build time, we do that for you. And it tells you, you're not doing that, it's done for you. And if you have them nested, which you can do with your pages, right, then your automatic import will look like this. So this is what you would put in your page down here. But do that, which is like, okay, that's great. Now I don't have to have 200 imports that I'm just going to use all of them down here. And it cleans up this file a lot and makes your life a lot nicer. When we decide to do that, now we have to teach other components that we did that, right? Just doesn't know anything about Webpack. And so all the things that we do in Webpack or that we do in Babel, we have to figure out how to tell Jest that these are things that they can expect to exist. So that's a lot of work. And so a lot of people aren't going to do that. And so you kind of just go without a lot of these nice things, and then everybody does them differently, and there's just no reuse of all the time spent doing that. So as a framework, we sign up to really do that work for the community. And then we do it once, and then everyone can benefit. So we're coming up on here, maybe another question or two if anyone has anything. Would you say that Redwood is best suited for building particular kinds of an app? What are the current pros and cons of using Redwood? Yeah, so it's, I mean, you're gonna want to build a full stack application. So like a weblog is not a good use. Like we have an example blog, mostly just because everybody knows what a blog looks like. And so you can look at the files and be like, oh, this is the post page, and this is the layout and whatnot. And that's really easy to understand, but just a normal Jamstack is gonna be useful for those. I mean, it's also really early days for Redwood. So if you need some fancy things, like you want to use Redis and you want to, like, how do you want to do that? Because you need to put that near your business logic. So you're going to have that Redis running probably in the same data center as your Lambdas. And so getting that hooked up. So like if you have more sophisticated needs right now, some of these things might be a little challenging to get running the way that Redwood wants them to run, but there's no reason that we can't get there, and we're working really hard to be able to get there, so that it's like, okay, you need background jobs. How are you going to do that? Well, it doesn't seem like anyone has a decent answer for that in sort of the world right now. And so maybe we'll build that. Maybe someone will come out with something that looks like that soon that we can use, but it's like running background jobs is a thing that you need. So what do you build with it right now? I think you'd have to be pretty brave to build anything super complex at the current moment while we're still in alpha. But we do have some community members that are essentially building their startup with Redwood and have committed to helping us build out the missing pieces. So it's, I mean, again, these are all fairly standard technologies, aside from maybe the router and some of the, the core stuff, but like React that we use and Apollo, like these things are really polished. So we just need to bring the core elements of Redwood up to speed, which we'll do over the next 6 to 8 months. Hopefully we can get a 1.0 out by, I don't know, the end of the year. And we'll go from there. So I guess just anything you would build with Rails is the idea that you would be able to build that same thing with Redwood, but you're using it, you're doing it in a React, JavaScript first, JavaScript end-to-end, plus GraphQL, plus multi-client, plus ready, bring all that to the table. Okay, let me scan here real quick. Looks like David's answered a bunch of these questions. Prisma 2 also ships with a nice database browser that we need to hook up and expose still, but then you go in and see all the stuff in your database. We also have scaffold generators. You can scaffold things, which I didn't show in here, but RW. You can see that we can generate a variety of, well, I guess we don't list them here. I don't know if we have a help command we do. So you can generate authentication, cells, components, functions, layouts, pages, scaffolds. You can generate the SDL or the service files. All these things have generators to make your life easier. And so you can scaffold out essentially a database object, which might be a nice way to get started. And then you just have a really nice looking sort of editor and list of all of the database tables. And you can actually use that and then build that out into your actual interface. That's sort of the goal, that scaffolds become something that you do in your daily workflow of creating things, potentially. Yeah, it's just a lot of convenience things. We have built-in forms as well. Form, F-O-R-M. So you can look at the reference here, Redwood form. Makes it really easy to do error checking. So you get like, what do your errors look like? You can do validation. You can do pattern matching validation on your forms. And this takes care of all of your form stuff, right? You're not worried about controlled components and like, where do I update the value of the field every time someone Press is a key. We take care of all this for you, and it's just built in to the framework. So you can check out the form support. So we're just trying to build a whole ecosystem around what are the things that are hard in web development, and how do we make them easier?
Do you have any issues that are good to get started with for anyone that wants to contribute on GitHub?
Well, we're working on TypeScript support, full TypeScript support right now. So if you have TypeScript expertise and want to help convert some of the backend things that are still in JavaScript, or just give us advice on the best ways to do that. None of us, honestly, are like super good TypeScript people on the core of the 4 core team members. So we are relying on the community for a little bit of that help, but it's really something that we want to double down on and make sure that we have as much intelligence in the editor as you can have. We're also working with some people to have an IDE experience that really pulls these things together and understands the framework and provides a lot of nice things in the IDE. So you can look for that coming up in the next few months, probably. It'll be a plugin that you install, and it just knows like everything about your application and can help you work on it even more than we do now. So TypeScript would be great. I don't know, you can look at the issues. I don't know, just come in the community. We have a forum, a discourse forum right now, and you can come say hi and ask any questions that you have there and see kind of what's going on at the moment. Storybook, if you are a Storybook expert, we would love your help in getting that integrated, because that also is tricky, just like Jest. So yeah, well, you're very welcome. We're definitely looking for contributors, and we will try to foster you in that regard as well as we can.
Okay, so thank you. This looks really, really cool. I'm inspired. So thank you for taking your time, and we'll share the recording as well. We'll send you the link if you want to share it somewhere, but we'll send it out into the meetup as well. And yeah, great stuff. Thank you a lot. And
awesome. Thanks for having me. It was a good time.
Thanks everyone for joining as well. And
oh, one more thing. One more thing I should say.
Go for it.
If you want stickers, I realize now I wasn't sharing my screen when I was talking about the form stuff. If you want stickers, you can go to redwoodjs.com/stickers. There's a link on the homepage there as well. And I will ship you stickers. If you're in Stockholm or anywhere else in the world, I will ship them to you for free. I'll ship you 5. You can have 5 stickers, and I will send them for free, literally anywhere in the world.
That is amazing. I'm going to get myself some stickers. Very nice.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening, everyone, or good day if you're in America. Ciao, ciao.
All right, you too. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.